The UK economy has struggled for decades, but especially over the last 15 years, and the simple truth is there's only one thing that can fix this. And with the budget on the horizon, this discussion has never been more important. This is not a political video, this is an economics video. So the first thing we should really look at is the growth of the UK economy. This will really help us set the scene and build a broader context for what we're going to be discussing. Let's just take a look at this graph here. In the post-war period, the average growth of the UK economy was 3.7% per year. From 1973 to 2008, it was 2.3%. And from 2008 till now, it's been a meagre 1.2%. And let's take a look at this graph instead. The dotted line shows the 1948 to 1973 trend. And what you can gradually see is that the UK's actual growth has completely started to flatline. And the truth is, it's not when you just make historical comparisons. Take a look at this graph here, which shows GDP per person. Here's the UK, and then if we add the US, then the UK picture starts to look pretty dire. Let's add in Denmark, another good comparative example. And just for illustration purposes only, let's take a look at Poland over the same time period. Whilst Poland still sits below the UK in terms of the rankings, look at the rate of growth it has gone through. But the truth is, whilst we look at these metrics and they can seem quite abstract, the truth of the matter is these have real-world consequences for people's day-to-day finances. And one of the most important implications that slow economic growth has is on people's real wages. Let's take a look at this graph. Again, we have the dotted line here, which shows the pre-financial crisis trend. Look at the unbelievable gap that we have between where we actually have ended up and where we should have ended up had the previous growth rate been able to continue. And as the caption points out, average weekly wages in 2023 are still below where they were in 2008. And what you invariably find when you start to look at these in any real detail is all of these economic variables are inextricably linked. And this is really what I'm talking about. But one of the reasons why we've just seen completely flatlining wages has been because of what is been dubbed the productivity puzzle. This is a quote from an American economist, Paul Krugman, who's won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 1995. And he said, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. This graph here in pink shows the 1970 to 2000 trend in actual productivity, and you can see the actuals in blue. And again, we have this complete and utter disparity between what we should be seeing in the UK economy and what has actually come to pass. Had productivity increased at the rate it had been doing, then UK productivity would be about 20% higher. Now you might well be thinking, well, hang on a minute, this is a meaningless metric. I don't care about labour productivity. But the truth is, it's a fair question. Why would you? Until you take a look at this diagram. The blue line shows average weekly earnings and the pink coloured diagram shows worker productivity. And so what you invariably find is that higher productivity is directly linked to higher wages. And this leads us to an interesting conundrum, which is, had worker productivity increased at the trend rate, the average UK worker would be about £9,000 per year better off. So again, whilst these economic variables can seem abstract, the truth is that it does have real-world consequences for people's day-to-day lives. So what is it that really drives this correlation between productivity and wages? Well, the first thing is, if your workforce is able to produce more stuff in an hour, whether you're working on a factory line, whether you're producing submarines, whether you're processing contracts, whether you're doing your accounts, all of that leads to worker productivity. So if your company is able to produce more in a given, let's just say 40-hour week, then that means your company is more profitable. More profitable means that your company can afford to pay its workers better. And that's invariably because the worker is able to contribute more to the company in a given time period. Now, the UK is often touted as having a very low unemployment rate, but the truth is that when you start to look at diagrams like this, where we have very low rates of unemployment, but we have very high rates of people who are in work poverty, it starts to give you a really kind of better idea about one of the reasons why UK productivity has struggled as much as it has. So at the start of the video, we said that there is a potential silver bullet right here, that there is one thing that the government can do which will make everyone's life so much easier and so much better and will solve all of these economic ills, and that is investment. So we've already discussed a little bit about how there just seems to be disasters everywhere. Productivity is in the toilet, investment is way below where it should be, growth has been really slow, and this is part of the problem with economics, is that you find that all of these variables are really interlinked with one another. And so what this means is that as one variable starts to falter, that has knock-on consequences for other parts of the economy. This can lead to a really vicious downward cycle for the economy, and that's invariably what we're seeing in the UK, is that it almost doesn't matter where you look, across the board the UK economy is struggling. But that is a double-edged sword, because the truth of the matter is that once you start to improve in one part of the economy, let's say you start to increase investment, for example, that has a knock-on effect which can lead to upward virtuous cycles. And to some degree, this is something that the government does understand. They've just wrapped up their big investing summit where they've flown in CEOs from far and wide to bring them all to the UK to show them what a good place it is to invest. So you might be thinking, well, hang on, how are all these variables linked? What is investment? Well, in economic circles, investment is any money that's spent which can expand the productive capacity of the economy. And this can have a few different branches. So you might have private investment. This is, for example, companies deciding to build a new factory, it's deciding to extend production lines, it's deciding to invest in new machinery, training their workforce. All of these things will help make their workers more productive. But then you've also got public investment. This is where the government goes out and spends money. It improves public transport, it improves healthcare to have a fitter, healthier workforce. It invests in education to make sure that when kids finish school, they've got some of the core skills that they'll need to go out into the workplace. It's installing high-speed internet. We are very much a services-based economy. So it's, again, all of these things start to lead to a combination. So once you start to look at it like that, you can start to see how you can build quite a good picture about how investment helps to boost the economy. And let's take a look at this diagram. You can see in blue, we've got the actual business investment, and in the pink color, we've got a trend graph. What you invariably find is that after the Brexit vote, investment just completely collapsed. But we should also be kind of honest about this. This is something that the UK has been at the bottom of the G7 rankings when it comes to public and private investment for 24 out of the last 30 years. So whilst it is fair to say that Brexit has undoubtedly had an impact on investment, it is not the only driver of why the UK has had such low investment. And to put this into a wider perspective, there was this report here that found that the UK has underinvested in some of its public services by £500 billion. And these numbers can start to seem abstract when we get to numbers of that size, but hopefully it helps to really illustrate the scale of the problem. But how bad is it really for the UK? Well, let's just go through a couple of examples very quickly. Here we can see that the UK is right at the bottom when it comes to the amount of income it spends on research and development. Again, another key driver when it comes to trying to boost productivity. The OECD average for R&D spending is about 2.4%. The UK comes in at 1.7%. This is lower than other countries like the US, Germany, Japan. We can also look at infrastructure investment. The UK's infrastructure investment is about 0.8% of GDP, well below other countries like France, which is at 1.2%, and Germany at 1.4%. The UK's digital infrastructure is really lacking as well. If you look at this table here, you can see that the UK ranks 35th when it comes to access to high-speed broadband. The UK has also historically underinvested in education. The OECD average has been about 5%. The UK has been 4-something%. And again, you take a look at this graph here, you can see that per pupil spending has just about started to recover from where it was in 2010. But you look at capital spending, it is still way below where it should be. That's putting kids in new schools with better facilities, that's upgrading some of the technology that they're using, and frankly it's decisions like this which have led to some of the disasters that we've seen around RAC in schools. Now, we mentioned earlier in the video that some people will understandably be anxious about the government spending more money. Looking here at the debt to GDP ratio, which is not the highest it's ever been, but still absolutely enormous. Or if you look at this diagram, which shows how much the UK spends on interest repayments every month, which have started to skyrocket. But here's the bottom line. Investment helps drive productivity. And as we've talked about, productivity is the driver of just about every single economic variable conceivable. This comes from the OBR's most recent Fiscal Risks and Sustainability report. Scroll through the plethora of diagrams, tables, and long explanations, and you get to this graph. And this analysis clearly shows one thing, that one of the few effective ways to stop public debt from absolutely exploding is through productivity growth. And the fact of the matter is you can only get these increasing rates of productivity growth through public and private investment. And frankly, this is even more concerning when you consider that productivity growth was negative in 2023 and has basically flatlined in 2024. So we talked earlier about how if the UK had been able to bridge this gap just here between the trend productivity growth and the actual productivity growth, that would equal between, it's kind of about £9,000 to £10,000 per household per year. But that on its own would equate to £100 billion per year in extra tax revenue. Now, it's perfectly reasonable to ask where all this tax revenue is going to come from. And as we've mentioned, when you have increases in productivity to produce more, that's higher corporation tax. They're able to pay their employees more, which is higher national income and income tax receipts. People have more disposable income, which they can go out and spend. That's higher VAT receipts. And let's not forget that between income tax, national insurance, corporation tax, and VAT, that covers about 70 or 75% of the UK's total tax take in a single year. So it starts to become a bit easier to envisage how actually the government's spending some money now to boost labour productivity is frankly something that will not only pay for itself, but might actually stem some of the increases in the national debt that we've seen for the last 10, 15 years. But to explain the graph in a little bit more detail, we've got a low base and a high case. Now in the yellow we can see the high case, and the high productivity scenario basically says if productivity growth rises to 2.5%, then nominal GDP would be about 55% higher by the time you get to 2073-74. Public debt would fall to 65% of GDP at the end of the projected period, which is a sharp decline from where we currently find ourselves. So we've talked a lot about how the UK has ended up in this situation with low growth, completely flatlining investment, flatlining or declining labour productivity, and how public and private investment can really help to break that cycle by having the public sector build more airports, build more roads, install faster internet, invest in a healthier workforce. That then has a compounding effect to companies wanting to build factories next to these new roads, import and export their goods more easily from these new ports and these new airports. And then this will invariably lead to a virtuous circle of lifting the economy from this malaise that it's found itself in for decades. But we've also covered how this is not necessarily money spent on the economy. As long as these investments are targeted and really helps to boost labour productivity, that has a plethora of positive economic outcomes. Now, with the budget just around the corner, we are going to be reacting to it on the day. We're going to be giving all of our criticisms, all of our collective angst, and kudos where it's due. And if you've liked this video, we have this video just here where we really go into a lot more detail about why the UK economy has struggled so much since the financial crisis. It's another really good watch, which I think will really help to improve people's understandings. And then we also have 2 more videos coming out in the next few days. One is going to be about how Rachel Reeves might unfortunately fumble at the first hurdle and why there is so much riding on this budget. And the second video is going to be looking at some of the reasons why the UK may be facing a turning point, being able to finally reverse some of the decades of decline that have just haunted us for years. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, share with your friends. It doesn't cost you a penny, and if you think I'm talking absolute nonsense, you can unsubscribe later. Thanks very much for watching.